I was 30 feet away when a stupid Karen tried petting a baby Bigfoot, and then something horrifying happened next. I was close enough to see her face when it looked back at her, and what it did afterwards made the situation the most dangerous scenario I've ever been in, and our chance of survival suddenly changed to 0. My name is David Reyes. I have been a wilderness guide and trail naturalist in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 16 years. I run interpretive hike, wildlife education programs, and backcountry tours for groups of 2 to 12. I am telling you this because what I encountered in the backcountry above Alum Cave Trail in late August was not an animal I had a catalog entry for. The group was a party of 4 weekend hikers, recreational experience level, booked through the Visitor Center's guided tour program. I had run the same route, Alum Cave to the ridge overlooking back, probably 200 times. Standard Saturday morning tour, 5 hours round trip, moderate terrain, good wildlife viewing if you are quiet and patient, which recreational hikers generally are not, and which I have learned to manage. 3 of the 4 were fine, a retired couple from Tennessee and a solo hiker in his 30s, but then came the 4th, which was a woman in a yellow fleece. I am not going to expose her name, so I'll call her the Yellow Fleece. She had arrived at the trailhead 11 minutes late with a travel mug of what she described, loudly, as a macchiato, a camera that cost more than my monthly salary, and the specific energy of a person who has decided that their experience of a place is the primary fact about that place. She had opinions about the pace before we had covered a quarter mile. She had opinions about the route. She had opinions, voiced at a volume that will not have helped us with wildlife sighting probability, about the fact that she had seen better views from a ski resort in Utah. Gerald caught my eye somewhere around the half-mile mark and gave me the small nod of a person who has also been on group activities with someone like this and is communicating solidarity across the space between them. I gave him the small nod back. We kept moving. The first sighting happened at 2 miles on the switchback below the bluffs. I saw it first because I am trained to see things first. It is the job, the continuous peripheral scan of the trail environment that becomes automatic after enough years, the registration of anything that is not where it is supposed to be before conscious attention has fully arrived at it. At the base of the bluff in the rhododendron thicket at the edge of the trail corridor, something was crouched. I stopped the group with a hand signal, the open palm behind me that means halt without sound, and I looked. It was not a bear cub. I have encountered bear cubs on this trail 7 times in 16 years, and I know what a bear cub looks like in the vegetation at various ranges and various light conditions. The proportions were not a bear cub. The head was too large relative to the body in the way infant primate heads are large relative to their bodies, not in the way bear cub heads are. The limbs were visible through the gap in the rhododendron, and limbs are where the distinction between a bear and something else becomes clear. A bear cub has 4 legs, each of which terminates in a paw, and moves in the pattern specific to bear locomotion. What was in the rhododendron at the base of the bluff had 2 arms and 2 legs. It was sitting. I am going to tell you what I thought in that first second because it matters. I thought Bigfoot. A flicker, gone before the conscious mind finished forming it, because 16 years of training tells you that word does not belong in your working vocabulary on a Saturday morning tour. I dismissed it. I went back to looking. Not crouching the way a bear crouches, the compressed 4-point readiness of a cub that is deciding whether to climb or run. Sitting, the specific seated posture of something that uses the sit as a resting position rather than as a transitional stance. Upright through the back. The weight is distributed in the way weight distributes when the legs are folded in front rather than tucked beneath. It was also, in the moment I found it, looking at something in its hands. 2 hands. I registered both of them in the second or so I had before the group reacted to the halt. 2 hands, individually articulated, holding something, a piece of bark I thought, or a root, with the specific grip of something that holds objects for examination rather than consumption. I turned to face the group, and I was in the process of formulating a quiet instruction to remain still when the Yellow Fleece said, at full conversational volume, "Oh my God, it's a baby bear." It was not a baby bear. I said quietly and directly, "Do not move and do not make any additional sound." She had already taken 2 steps off the trail. I want to describe the next 90 seconds with precision because the precision is the only thing that communicates how fast this went from a sighting to a situation. The Yellow Fleece moved toward the rhododendron thicket with the specific confidence of someone who has seen wildlife on television and has formed conclusions about wildlife behavior from the watching of it. She was not being malicious. I want to be clear about that because what comes later requires that the distinction distinction be made. She was not a cruel person. She was a person who had assembled an understanding of the world from sources that did not include 16 years of backcountry naturalist work, and that understanding had not equipped her for what she was currently walking toward. She had the camera raised. She was making sounds, soft, high-pitched sounds that she had apparently concluded were appropriate wildlife communication, the kind of sounds people make at cats or small dogs. She covered the 12 feet between where I had stopped the group and the edge of the rhododendron thicket in approximately 10 seconds. I was moving. I want to be clear about that. I was already in motion, reaching for her arm, already calculating the angle and the speed and what I was going to say and how I was going to get her back to the trail without triggering a defensive response from whatever was in the thicket. I was trained for this, and I was reacting with everything 16 years of training had given me. I was not fast enough. She reached through the rhododendron and she put her hand on it. I am going to describe what happened when she made contact, because what happened is the part that changed my understanding of what we were looking at. It did not flee. It did not vocalize. It did not exhibit any of the startle flight responses I have observed in every other wildlife encounter where unexpected human contact has been made at close range. What it did was this. It went very still, not the freeze of a startled animal, the considered stillness of something that has registered a new variable and is deciding what to do with it. It turned its head, and the neck rotation was primate, full and lateral in a way that no bear cub manages, and it looked at the yellow fleece's hand on its shoulder with the specific quality of attention that I can only describe as deliberate. Then it looked at her face. I was close enough to see the face. I was close enough that I have thought about the face every day since August and will probably keep thinking about it. It was not a bear's face, and it was not a human face, and what it most resembled, in the half second I had to register it before everything changed, was the face of something that was older than it was small. The forward-set eyes, the heavy brow, the flatness across the cheekbones, features that were assembled in a configuration that my brain kept trying to map to something in its catalog and kept failing. It looked at her face for 2 seconds. Then it made a sound, not loud. That is the first thing I need to tell you, because loud is what you expect from an animal in a threat situation. It was not loud. It was a single, short vocalization, a sound that had a pitch and a shape to it in the way sounds have shapes when they have been produced with intent. And it was not directed at the yellow fleece. It was directed away from her, into the forest above the bluff, into the uphill tree line. I understood what it was doing before I understood anything else about what it was. It was calling for something, the specific vocalization of something that is small and has encountered a situation it cannot manage on its own and is sending for the thing that manages situations it cannot manage. It was calling its mother, a baby Bigfoot calling for its mother because a stranger in a yellow fleece had just put a hand on it. I said loudly and with a clarity I do not use in normal. Trail guidance. Everyone back to the trail right now. Gerald and Maureen moved immediately. Marcus moved immediately. The yellow fleece was still looking at the thing in the rhododendron with the expression of someone who is having an experience they intend to describe to other people and is still assembling the description. I took her arm. I'm not going to describe whether she objected to that, because what came through the tree line above the bluff approximately 40 seconds later made the question irrelevant. I felt it before I heard it. That is the sequence I need you to understand. Felt, then heard, then saw. The ground vibration was first a rhythmic compression through the trail substrate that I registered through the soles of my boots before it was available to any other sense. Footfalls, bipedal from the weight distribution, the alternating heel strike of something moving on 2 points rather than 4, heavy enough that the forest floor transmitted it through 6 inches of root mat and leaf litter and into the packed earth of the trail surface. Then the sound, not a vocalization, the sound of movement through forest canopy, a very specific sound that anyone who has spent time in dense mixed hardwood knows as distinct from wind, the percussion of branches being displaced by something moving through them, rapid and purposeful, coming from the ridge above the bluff and getting closer. Then I saw it. It came through the tree line at the top of the bluff, a gap in the canopy roughly 40 feet above and 60 feet to our north, and it was not crouching, and it was not moving carefully, and it was not doing anything that resembled the measured, deliberate motion of what had been in the rhododendron. It was moving fast. I am going to give you the observation and not the embellishment, because what I am describing is an adult Bigfoot, 8 feet tall by my estimate against the canopy height, I know, broad across the shoulders in a way that the passage through the canopy registered, branches deflecting outward, not breaking, the way a pushed door deflects rather than break, because the force is distributed rather than concentrated. Dark, moving on 2 feet down the bluff face at a speed that the grade should not have permitted without a fall. It did not fall. It came down the face of that bluff bluff the way water comes down a face. Fast, adaptive, without hesitation, finding its footing on a grade that I would have descended on hands and knees and doing it at a run. We were already moving. I had the yellow fleece by the arm, and Gerald had Maureen, and Marcus was 3 steps ahead of all of us, and the trail below us was clear, and we were moving as fast as 4 people of varying physical capacity can move down a switchback trail in hiking boots on packed earth. I want to describe the physical experience of that first stretch of running because it is not something I had occasion to put into words until much later, and the words matter for understanding the rest of the account. The trail at that point drops in a series of tight switchbacks, packed dirt and exposed root systems, and the occasional loose stone that I know individually from 16 years of walking that same ground. I was running it the way you run a familiar staircase in the dark, not looking down, trusting the feet to find what they already know is there, because my eyes were not on the trail. My eyes were behind me and ahead of me and on the yellow fleece's arm in my hand, in a rotation that left almost nothing for the actual mechanics of running, which is a dangerous way to move quickly down a mountain trail, and which I did anyway, because the alternative was worse. The yellow fleece's camera was still around her neck, swinging hard against her chest with every stride, and at some point in those first few switchbacks, the macchiato she had been carrying since the trailhead, which she had somehow kept hold of through the entire encounter at the rhododendron, left her hand without either of us deciding it should. I do not remember seeing it fall. I remember later noticing that her hand was empty. I am going to describe what was happening behind us because I was watching it while we ran. Because watching what is behind you is what you do when what is behind you is the relevant threat. And the only way to manage a threat you cannot see is to not stop seeing it. There is a particular kind of attention that takes over in a moment like that, and I want to try to describe it because I do not think people who have not experienced it understand how it actually works. It is not panic, or at least it was not panic for me in those first several seconds. Panic is loud, and panic narrows things down to almost nothing. What I had instead was a strange widening, an awareness that seemed to be running on 2 tracks simultaneously, one track entirely occupied with the mechanical business of getting 4 people down a switchback trail without anyone going down on the loose stone, and a second track that was doing nothing but processing the sound coming from behind us, second by second, building a model of distance and speed out of nothing but echo and vibration, because I did not yet have the nerve to turn my head and confirm it with my eyes. It reached the base of the bluff in the time it took us to cover roughly 60 feet of trail. I know the bluff, a 40-foot near vertical face of exposed sandstone with a slope at the base extending another 15 feet at roughly 45 degrees before it meets the rhododendron zone. To descend it at any speed requires technical climbing experience or something not operating under the same gravitational constraints I do. It reached the base in under 10 seconds. I heard it before that first backward glance confirmed it. A sound somewhere between the controlled scrape of something descending loose rock with intention and the heavier percussive impact of something that does not need to control its descent because its mass and its grip make the question of control academic. Stone displaced, gravel running ahead of the movement and pattering into the rhododendron below. No cry, no roar, nothing vocal at all. Just the sound of a great deal of weight covering 40 feet of near vertical sandstone faster than I would have thought survivable, let alone fast. Then it stopped. At the base of the bluff, at the edge of the rhododendron where the juvenile was still crouched, it stopped. I saw it over my shoulder while we were running, and I registered the stop before I registered what it meant. A full stop, not a deceleration. A stop the way something stops when it has chosen to stop rather than when it has run out of momentum. Weight shifted back, both feet planted, head up, looking at us. I kept running. Gerald called something to me from behind. A question, I think, whether to stay on the trail or leave it, and I did not answer because the answer required processing. I was not going to divert resources to while running. Stay on the trail. The trail is the fastest way down. The trail is the way I know. Off the trail in the Smokies is dense rhododendron and downed timber and grade that will turn an ankle and slow you down. And slow is the thing you cannot be. We covered the next quarter mile in a time I would not have told you was possible for that group at the start of that Saturday morning. Gerald and Maureen had a decade and a half on me, and they moved with the specific urgency of people who have been told something serious and have decided to believe it. Marcus ran well. The yellow fleece ran. I want to note that. She ran. Whatever had reorganized her understanding of the situation in the 40 seconds between touching the juvenile and seeing what came down the bluff had done its job. She ran without asking questions and without the commentary about pace that had characterized the first 2 miles of the morning. I was watching the trail behind us while we ran. I am going to describe what I was seeing because the seeing of it is the part that stayed with me longer than anything else in this account. The trail corridor through that section of Alum Cave is approximately 8 feet wide, narrow enough that the rhododendron canopy meets above your head and you're moving through a tunnel of green. Behind us, through that tunnel, I could see back approximately 60 feet before the switchback cut the sight line. For the first 60 feet of our run, I could see the point where we had stopped, the rhododendron thicket, the base of the bluff. It was standing there. I caught the glimpse on the first backward glance, maybe 15 seconds into the run, a dark shape at the edge of the thicket at the bluff base, at the position where it had stopped, tall enough that it showed above the rhododendron canopy even at that distance, not moving, watching. On the second backward glance, 30 seconds in, as the switchback took the sight line away, still there, still not moving, still watching us go. I do not know what to do with those 2 glances, the watching of it, the stillness of something capable of descending a 40-foot bluff in 10 seconds, choosing instead to stand at the base of that bluff and observe 4 people running away from it. There is a quality to being watched by something that is significantly more capable than you are and is choosing not to use that capability, and the quality is not relief. Relief comes when the threat withdraws. This was something else. This was the feeling of being assessed from a position of complete advantage by something that has decided you do not require its full attention. I have spent 16 years in the backcountry of this park. I have been in situations with bears that required me to be afraid, and I know what that fear feels like. The immediate animal response to immediate animal threat. What I felt while running that switchback with those glances over my shoulder was a different quality entirely. Not the fear of being in danger, the fear of having understood something about your own position in a hierarchy that you had previously not known you were part of. At the half-mile mark, I looked back down the trail. The trail behind us was empty. No movement in the tree line on either side. No ground vibration through my boots. No sound from the canopy above the trail corridor. I did not slow down. At the quarter-mile mark, I looked back again. Still empty. Still nothing. The trail was just the trail, and the forest on both sides of it was just the forest, and we were the only thing moving on it. We came out of the tree line at the trailhead at a pace that earned us several looks from the day hikers who were starting their morning at the parking area. I did not stop at the trailhead. I moved the group to the vehicles, and I stood with my back to the group and my eyes on the trail entrance and my radio in my hand, and I watched for 4 minutes. Nothing came out. I put the group in my vehicle and I drove them to the visitor center, and I sat with them for 20 minutes while the adrenaline cleared to the point where useful conversation was possible. Maureen had a small cut on her palm from a branch she had caught on the run. Gerald was breathing steadily and said nothing for the first 10 minutes, and then said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "I have never seen anything move like that." I want to describe what the 4 of us looked like in that parking lot because it matters and because it is not the part of an account like this that usually gets told. Maureen's hands would not stop, not shaking exactly. A finer thing than shaking, a continuous low-amplitude tremor in both hands that she kept trying to suppress by pressing her palms flat against her thighs, and that kept returning the moment she stopped pressing. She noticed me notice it, and she said, almost apologetically, "It'll pass in a minute," the way a person describes a symptom they have cataloged before and are managing rather than panicking about. It did not pass in a minute. It was still there at the 8-minute mark when I checked again without meaning to make it obvious that I was checking. Marcus had gone quiet in a different register than his usual quiet. He had been a measured observational presence for the first 2 miles of the hike, the kind of hiker who asks good questions and listens to the answers. In the parking lot, he stood with his weight on the balls of his feet, angled very slightly toward the trailhead, in the specific stance of someone whose body has not yet been informed by the rest of him that the running is over. I watched him do it 3 separate times, a half step toward the tree line, caught and reversed, as if some part of his nervous system was still tracking a threat his conscious mind had filed as past tense. My own hands were fine. That is not bravery. It is a function of having had this particular reaction before, in other contexts, and having learned what my body does with adrenaline, it has not been given anywhere to put. What I had instead was the inability to stop checking the tree line. I would look at Maureen, look at my radio, look at the group, and the eyes would slide back to the gap in the canopy at the head of the trail before I had finished a thought, and I would have to consciously redirect them. And a few seconds later, they would slide back again. The yellow fleece had not moved from where she'd stopped walking, 8 or so feet from the rest of us, and she had her arms wrapped around herself in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her breathing was the loudest thing in the parking lot for a while, fast, shallow, audible. And then, gradually, over a couple of minutes, it slowed into something closer to normal. And I watched that happen the way you watch a kettle stop boiling, with a kind of relief that has no particular satisfaction in it, just the absence of one more thing to monitor. None of us talked for those first several minutes. There is a specific quality to the silence after a shared threat that I have encountered exactly twice before in 16 years of this work. And it is not an empty silence. It is a silence with all 4 people in it at once, each person running the same 90 seconds back through their own memory at their own speed, arriving at slightly different frames, and none of them ready yet to compare notes. Marcus asked me, directly and without the kind of preamble that people use when they think the question might sound crazy, "What was it?" I told him I didn't know. That was not entirely honest. I had 16 years of catalog entries, and what had come down that bluff was not in any of them. I knew the silhouette. I knew the reports. Anyone who has worked this park long enough knows the reports, the accounts filed over decades, the ones that get logged and quietly closed. I knew the word that fit, and the word was Bigfoot. I was not going to say it in front of 4 people in a parking lot at a national park visitor center. The yellow fleece had not said anything for the entire drive and the entire 20 minutes at the visitor center. She was looking at her hands, which were in her lap, and she had the specific expression of someone who is replaying a sequence of events and arriving at different conclusions on each pass. The camera was still around her neck. I do not know if she had gotten any photographs. I did not ask. Finally, she said, "I thought it was a bear." I said, "I know." She said, "I could have," and then she stopped. I said, "Yes?" She said, "Is it still out there?" I said, "Yes." She looked at the tree line at the edge of the parking lot, the place where the maintained ground of the visitor center met the beginning of the park's interior, the wall of mixed hardwood that starts where the mowed grass ends, and she looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I believed her. I want to be clear about that too, because everything else in this account requires it. She had done something profoundly dangerous, and she had done it from ignorance rather than malice. And she knew it now, and the knowing of it was visible in her face in the way that genuine realization is visible. Not the performance of remorse, but the real thing. The specific look of someone who has just understood at a physical level what the word consequence means. I filed a report that afternoon, a standard wildlife encounter report, the form used for bear interactions and coyote sightings, and the occasional elk confrontation in the campground areas. I filled in the fields with language that I calibrated to be accurate without being specific. Unusual large primate, undetermined species, possible defensive response to contact with juvenile, rapid descent of approximately 40-foot bluff, no injuries sustained. Group evacuated successfully. My supervisor read it the following Monday and called me into his office and asked me to walk him through the encounter in more detail. And I did, and he listened without expression until I was finished. And then he said, "I'm going to need you to revise the species classification on this to unknown bear interaction." I asked him why. He said, "Because that's the classification that closes cleanly." I looked at him for a moment. He did not look away. He has been with the Park Service for 23 years, and he is not an unintelligent man, and he was not telling me he did not believe me. He was telling me something else entirely. He was telling me that what I had seen was a Bigfoot, that the Park Service had a policy about Bigfoot, and that the policy was not acknowledged. I revised the report. Unknown bear interaction. Filed, reviewed, closed. I have thought about what I saw on that bluff every day since August. The speed of the descent, the planted stop at the base, the moment when it looked at us over the distance of the trail and did not come after us. That last part. I have run wildlife encounters for 16 years, and I know the threat assessment behavior of every large predator this park supports. I know what pursuit looks like, and I know what warning looks like, and I know the specific difference between an animal that has decided you are a threat to be eliminated and an animal that has decided you are a threat to be moved. Black bears bluff charge. They make noise. They escalate in a sequence designed to give the intruder every possible opportunity to leave before contact occurs. What stopped at the base of that bluff and looked at us was not bluff charging. It was not making noise. It was not going through a sequence designed to give us an opportunity. It was looking at us For the 3 or 4 seconds that I was watching it over my shoulder while we ran, it was standing at the edge of the rhododendron with the juvenile behind it, and it was watching us leave with the specific attention of something that has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion. Not anger in the way an animal is angry, the immediate reactive escalation of a threatened predator. Something slower than that. Something that had more information in it. I think it knew we were leaving. I think it had assessed the group, 4 people, no weapons, all moving away at their best available speed, and determined that pursuit was not necessary, that we were not a threat that required anything beyond the demonstration that it was present and capable, that the demonstration had been sufficient. The demonstration was sufficient. I do not go above the switchback below the bluffs alone anymore. I run the Alum Cave route 3 or 4 times a month, and every time I pass the 2-mile mark and the rhododendron zone comes into view, I do a specific thing. I stop the group before we enter it. I tell them we are going to move quietly through this section. I tell them there is sometimes bear activity in the thicket and I need them to stay on the trail and follow my instructions without delay. That is not a lie. It is a category adjustment. The Bigfoot that may be in that thicket is bear adjacent in the sense that it is large, it is wild, and contact with it is not compatible with your continued well-being. The specifics are my business. I find that more frightening than the alternative.